Most of you probably haven't heard of the Plaza Accord, even though it was one of the most important things the US did in its foreign policy to ensure it was the only superpower globally. But perhaps you have heard rumors about the lost decade or lost decades in Japan. This era began sometime in 1990 and brought about an economic stagnation from which Japan has not yet fully recovered. If purchasing power parity per capita is an indicator of living standards, then Japan's quality of living has been stagnant for the past 3 decades. The Nikkei 225 stock index, which tracks the performance of Japan's largest corporations, reached its all-time high in 1990 and has yet to repeat its performance 30 years later. The US stock market index has returned 1,000% over the same time frame. Yes, that's 1,000 times. There is no misspelling here. Join us as we reveal the strategy that the United States has used to keep the Japanese economy stagnant for over 3 decades, and while you watch, please give us a like and subscribe. So, how did it all begin? The destruction of the Japanese economy during and after World War II is well documented. The story of how the US used 2 atomic bombs to cripple and subdue Japan is very well known. The effect of those bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki seriously damaged Japan emotionally and economically. When the war finally ended, the United States gained administrative control over Japan as a result of the peace treaties. The United States government was then free to establish military bases all over the country and conduct the country's day-to-day affairs as it saw fit. Perhaps the United States and its allies will say they set this up to aid Japan in its reconstruction. Even though the United States may have wanted to help Japan for real reasons, smarter people would point out that the country's main strategic goals were to influence the Japanese government and society and to build up its military presence in the area. Japan went from being one of the world's poorest and lowest income regions to having the world's second largest economy, behind only the United States, in just a few decades. Experts in finance and history agree that the country's amazing economic growth is mostly due to a well-developed education system and economic policies that encourage growth. Japan would be able to mass-produce high-quality goods at rock-bottom prices if it industrialized quickly. This would give Japan the power to control markets around the world. Products from companies like Sony, Canon, Nikon, Toyota, Mitsubishi, and Honda come to mind. These are examples of a few of the world's most influential businesses at the time. However, it looked like the United States wanted something entirely different then, and Japan was in the way. The Japanese economy was expanding at a rate twice that of the United States, and Japanese exports were mostly the product of Japanese industries. Stopping them was essential to the United States. In 1985, the US and its closest allies signed the Plaza Accord, which raised the value of the Japanese yen and made Japanese exports less competitive worldwide. When it comes to export-driven economies, a weaker currency is preferable to a stronger one because it makes domestic product pricing more competitive in global markets. The Plaza Accord, which also goes by the name Plaza Agreement, was an attempt to balance trade between the United States, Germany, and Japan. However, it was only successful in balancing trade with Germany. The United States, Japan, and Germany signed the Plaza Accord to pledge to take certain policy actions that would weaken the US dollar. The United States has committed to lowering the government deficit. Japan and Germany were going to cut taxes to boost domestic demand. Participants agreed to take necessary steps to directly affect currency markets to reduce current account imbalances. The US dollar rose in value by over 47.9% between the start of 1980 and its peak in March 1985, just before the Plaza Accord was signed. The US manufacturing sector felt the effects of a strong currency since it made imported items more affordable. Because of this, powerful companies like Caterpillar and IBM pushed lawmakers to do something, which led to the Plaza Accord. Even though the value of the dollar went down faster after the Plaza Accord was put into place, it had already been going down for months. Although the accord greatly decreased the US trade imbalance with Germany, it did not close the gap with Japan. Even though not every policy goal was met, the main goal of reducing the US trade deficit by weakening the currency was achieved. The effects of the Plaza Accord had mostly worn off by 1987, and the US government had no interest in further devaluing the dollar. After the dollar kept falling in 1987, a second agreement called the Louvre Accord was made to set exchange rates. The Louvre Accord was signed into law to eliminate some of the most unpopular parts of the Plaza Accord. The US and Japan kept their promises about their money, and the other 5 countries made plans to step in if their currencies moved too far from a range that had been set. What did this mean for Japan? Whatever transpired after that can be considered ancient history. Japan's global reputation has never been the same after the country's economy collapsed and an asset bubble burst. After 3 decades, many of these consequences are still not back to normal. Japan's status as a global powerhouse was bolstered by the Plaza Accord. But the Accord had the unexpected effect of making Japan less dependent on the US by making it easier for Japan to trade with and invest in East Asia. But a stronger yen may have added to the drag on Japan's economy during the recession. The rising yen hurt Japan's industries that depend on exports in the short term. In response to this shock, the Japanese government made a big push to stimulate the economy at home through monetary and fiscal policy. In the late 1980s, Japan's financial and real estate industries went through huge loan and asset price bubbles because of this and other policies. Following the bursting of this bubble, Japan fell into a long era of poor growth and deflation that lasted into the 2000s. In this way, the Plaza Accord contributed to the spread of the lost decade in Japan. So, what was the lost decade? Japan's period of stagnation, which used to be called the lost decade, has lasted longer than a decade. Even though it was thought that Abenomics would start a chain reaction of economic growth, the world economy went through a rough patch. The yen's value went up, but stock prices went down, and it doesn't look like the Bank of Japan's negative interest rate will be enough to get the economy going again. The common belief is that the beginning of Japan's lost decade dates back to 1991, when a bubble in the price of real estate burst. For a more accurate tally of lost time, start your clock in 1985, when the speculative bubble began expanding. If the bubble hadn't burst, neither the long-term stagnation that followed nor the first bubble would have happened. In 1985, Japan passed the US as the world's biggest exporter of manufactured goods. Still, the trade problems between Japan and the US showed that growth based on exports couldn't go on forever. In 1985, the Plaza Accord took place, which led to a remarkable appreciation of the yen. During this time, the Japanese economy was first affected by the changes in the yen, and it stayed in this state for several years. Because Sumita was governor of the Bank of Japan, BOJ, for so many years, there was a long period of easy money, which led to a speculative bubble. Sumita and his successor, Governor Mino Yasushi, tightened monetary policy at the BOJ 5 times in 15 months after they took over in May 1989. In a short time, the bubble was smashed and the economy was further damaged by the delay in easing monetary policy. The effects of loosening and tightening monetary policy were what they were supposed to be, but there were also unintended effects. For an example of how long deflation lasted after the bubble burst, let's look at what BOJ Governor Hayami Masaru did with the zero interest rate policy. In August 2000, he suddenly changed it, only to put it back in place 6 months later in March 2001. Also, the strong quantitative easing by the Federal Reserve in the United States after the subprime mortgage crisis and the fall of Lehman Brothers helped the yen go up, and deflation happened. Increased government spending, also called fiscal stimulus, was first used in 1987 by Prime Minister Yakasone Yasuhiro to deal with the high value of the yen. This program cost the government a total of 6 trillion yen. After the bubble burst, all 3 administrations, led by Miyazawa Kiichi, Hosokawa Morihiro, and Murayama Tamahiro, took emergency measures that cost more than 10 trillion yen and focused on investing in public works. At the time, the United States was under pressure to boost domestic demand. As part of the Structural Impediments Initiative, Japan promised to spend 430 trillion yen on public investments over 10 years. This would be used to create a foundational plan for public investments. The budget for this program was raised by the Murayama administration to 630 trillion yen for 10 years, starting in 1995. If the Mundell-Fleming model is right, the further strengthening of the yen could be attributed to Japan's increased fiscal expenditures in response to concerns over the value of the yen. However, it's possible that more causes contributed. Vote-winning public works projects were popular among politicians. Also, it is thought that the government officials who didn't like the idea of deficit financing bonds liked public works projects that could be paid for with development bonds. The New York Times published an article on March 1, 1997, with the headline, "Japan's Road to Deep Deficit is Paved with Public Works." The article was shocked by the wasteful spending on public works in Japan, such as building a rural airport in the middle of nowhere that no one uses. Japan's heavy spending on public works led to a huge amount of social overhead capital, which helped push the country's public debt to more than 1 quadrillion yen. From 1985 to 1997, the number of people employed in the construction industry increased from 5.3 million to 6.85 million. A sharp drop caused many people to lose their jobs in the years that followed, and Japan continued to fall even further. What the world would be like if there were two great international heavyweights to keep one another in check is mind-boggling. Imagine how the world might be different if the Japanese ideals of precision, deference, and moderation had been widely adopted. Could these views and ideas possibly have protected us from the materialism, greedy capitalism, and mass production that the United States spread worldwide? Hit that subscribe button and we'll keep you informed in future videos.